Welcome back to Conscious Corner with Courtney. Today's conversation is for every woman who has ever been told she's too nice, too compassionate, or too soft to be an effective leader. I'm joined by Ashley Cox, author, speaker, podcaster, and leadership mentor for women business owners who are ready to break free from overwhelm, build high-performing teams, and buy back their time. With 20 years of experience leading teams across local, national, and international companies like Kroger and J.Crew, Ashley knows firsthand what it takes to lead well. But her leadership journey wasn't always straightforward. Early in her career, she was told that being too compassionate would turn her into a doormat. What she's since discovered and now teaches is that leadership isn't either or, it's both and. We can be compassionate and hold clear expectations. We can be empathetic and still create accountability. We can lead with heart and still address hard things. Today, we're exploring what it truly means to lead with compassion without losing yourself in the process. So, Ashley, I'm so happy you're here.
Hi, Courtney. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you and with your listeners. Hello, everyone.
Likewise, so happy to have you here. And I would love to begin with that moment early in your career when you were told you couldn't be so compassionate. I'm curious because a host of things come up within me when I hear that, but I'm curious to know, what did that land like for you?
Yeah, that was early in my leadership career. I was in my mid 20s. At that point, I had graduated college and was in my first leadership position. And I distinctly remember my manager telling me on the floor, on the sales floor of the store I was working at the time, that I was a quote bleeding heart, and that I was going to get run over by everyone if I continued to be so soft and compassionate. And that really just it was a moment that just like kind of took my breath away, right? I was like, oh, we're not supposed to be kind to people while we're leading them. That seems not right. It,
Yeah.
it felt very out of alignment with my values and who I am in this world and how I show up naturally. And so for a period of time, I was questioning, well, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be a leader because
Yeah.
if I can't be compassionate, if I can't be, caring and take care of my people, what am I doing here?
I think it's one of the greatest human qualities to be able to be compassionate. And I know for myself, it's just something that's so natural. It's always been there. So if somebody were to tell me that I need to somehow take that out of the equation, I don't know who I would be
Mhm.
without that huge character trait of mine. So I'm wondering, what do you think that people, or in your circumstance, this person, your colleague, what do you think is misunderstood about compassion in leadership?
I think that people have such a black and white view of leadership. It either has to be this or it has to be that way. And so much of the leadership that we've seen in our country and around the world has been very male dominated. Women are still trying to make their way to those leadership positions, whether it's CEO of a Fortune 500 company or it's being a CEO in your own business. There's a lot of examples of toxic leadership out there. And when you don't have a healthy example of leadership to observe, to follow, to take inspiration from, it's hard to know, how do I navigate this landscape with compassion and, like you mentioned in the introduction, with clarity and expectations and accountability. And so a lot of times you'll see leaders fall one side or the other. They either lean
Yeah.
way too compassionate and they do get run over and become a doormat.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I could understand now, looking back, where my manager was coming from. Like, there has to be a balance there. But you also can't go to the other side where you're ruling with an iron fist and you care for no one and it's my way or the highway. So we
Yeah.
have to find that middle ground where we can create harmony between those two things.
I see this a lot in the professionals that I work with, especially lawyers and executives, where they're at one extreme where they're over accommodating, or maybe they're the other extreme where they're overcorrecting and there's really no middle ground. But I, to your point, it doesn't have to be an either or. I find that some of the best leaders are a combination where they're in that sweet spot. And a lot of people who I work with, they find that when they can be in that middle space, that it helps them to build trust with their teams, that they're not just being perceived as this strong, unapproachable leader, that they show that they're vulnerable too, but at the same time they're able to be strong. And when people sense that, it creates more trust within an organization, which is leaps and bounds better for an organization collectively than to be one extreme or another. And I also think that in terms of the high responsibility that we have as leaders, that it makes the work more sustainable. That when we're constantly in this sort of facade of having to be strong all the time, and we don't allow ourselves to be compassionate, getting back to this compassion piece, we don't allow ourselves to have some compassion for ourselves, we're more prone to burnout. So that, again, that middle ground, I don't know that we see it as much, but when we can tap into that, that's really powerful for an organization.
Yeah, I love what you said there, Courtney, like really bringing it back to having compassion for ourselves also.
Mhm.
And I think that was in my early career, and after having that conversation with my manager, I was like, "Okay, Ashley, you've got to not be so nice. You can't do this. Like you're doing leadership wrong." And I
Yeah.
wasn't having compassion for myself and listening to my own intuition that said, "No, this isn't the way for you."
Hmm.
And I think, we have to start with ourselves. In order to give compassion to other people, we have to be compassionate to ourselves.
Yeah.
And we also have to be honest with ourselves. And sometimes we like to tell ourselves stories that aren't true,
Yes.
stories that are built around other people's assumptions or
Yeah.
ideas of who we are or beliefs about, how we're going to show up and interact in this world. And sometimes you have to just say, like, is this true?
Hmm.
Is it true that I'm too compassionate? Or how is that actually my strength? And what are the ways in which I can leverage that? And I think we have more of those really honest conversations with ourselves and with one another that allows us to find our voice, our path, and not have to put on armor every day to come into work and
Yeah.
to be someone that we aren't designed to be.
Wow. That's really powerful. And I think the fact that we can lean into more who we really are, that is like a superpower. I
Mhm.
know for myself, the compassion piece, self-compassion felt like a superpower, because in the work that I was doing as a litigator, and I think this comes up for a lot of not just women, men and women alike, especially those working in high stress roles like litigation and other high stakes professions, where we need to sort of have on armor. We need to give off the persona that we are strong, that we don't get pushed over easily. And so we stuff down the compassionate piece and we don't allow ourselves to feel. And in my experience, at the midway point of my 20 years working as a litigator, I felt like I was collapsing by the weight of the world and the pressure I was putting on myself. And when I was able to recognize that with mindfulness practice, I found that a little bit of self-compassion can go a long way. And I
Mhm.
actually became a better leader. I became less judgmental of myself and better able to focus. And that's what allowed me that compassion piece, and allowing myself to notice the thoughts and what I was telling myself, and the stories, about 99% of them were untrue.
Mhm.
That's what helped me to get out of my own way.
Yeah.
And as leaders, when we can be more aware of how we get in our own way, that's that's profound because that becomes the gateway to becoming a stronger leader, a more effective leader. So I love that you're acknowledging how compassion isn't a weakness. Quite the contrary, it's a superpower that allows us to be more effective in our leadership role.
Yeah, for sure.
I just wanted to go back again because I still think that I still the what was said to you by it was your manager
Mhm.
at the time, uh, the 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 compassion piece and how it can amount to being a doormat.
Mhm.
Can you explain a bit more for us the difference between being compassionate and being a doormat?
Oh, I'd love to. I think this is something that a lot of people see as synonymous, right?
Mhm.
Compassionate, doormat, they're the same. And it's not that way. I think that there's compassion on a spectrum, on a scale.
Yeah.
And if you are overly compassionate to the point where it's sort of self-sabotaging,
Hmm.
where you're giving away the farm, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you are not holding clear expectations or creating an accountable team or having healthy boundaries for yourself, because that's a big part of being overly compassionate or having toxic compassion,
Yeah.
then you can then truly become the doormat. I think that's when people start to take advantage of you. If you feel like you're being taken advantage of, if your team doesn't listen to you or respect you, if they're constantly crossing invisible boundaries that you've maybe thought about, but you haven't communicated clearly with your
Yeah.
team, then
Yeah.
that all creates that doormat-like experience and feeling. And so we have to reframe the way that we think about clarity and expectations and boundaries as not being things that are mean or that we're doing to people, but it's the way that we're building something together. And we have to be mindful of what do I need in order
Yeah.
to move through this world as a leader? What does my team need in order to be effective and capable in their roles? And how do we build something together that sees all of our humanity and
Mhm.
also understands that these are the things that we need to get done in order for our business to be sustainable?
I think boundaries becomes like a slippery slope because as women, our boundaries sometimes go out the window,
Mhm.
protecting our own space because we're such caretakers and we do it all, we do it well, and we're constantly taking care of others that we forget about the importance in boundaries to allow time for ourselves. And when we do, a lot of the female executives that I work with, they feel selfish for it.
Mhm.
But the oxygen mask analogy, I'm sure you've heard of it, and many of our listeners and viewers have heard of it, but it really holds true that if we don't put our own oxygen mask
Mhm.
on and we don't nourish ourselves, then we can't be there for others, for our teams. So in the work that I do, it's helping people to have a more healthy relationship to boundaries and
Mhm.
how to create them. I'm interested in the ways that you help women, female leaders, to create healthy boundaries.
Yeah. Well, first, I think it starts with the reframing of what is a boundary. And
Yeah.
part of that reframing in the work that I do with women is that this boundary allows you to show up better for your team
Mhm.
when you have the support, when you have the rest, when you have the time to focus on the work that is important to your vision and to, your long-term growth objectives. That's what allows you to show up better. That's what allows you to show up and not bite somebody's head off because you've let something go on for too long.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we have to start thinking about like, how does this boundary support your values? And that's where I always start with clients. What are your values? Let's get those really clear and
Mhm.
understand what are the things that are important to you, that are non-negotiables, that if if we were to cross those values, you would you would quit your business or quit your job today and say, I can't do this. This doesn't feel aligned. And so we have to really ground into like, who are we being and becoming in this world? And then let's start building boundaries around that really supports showing up in those ways in a meaningful way.
Yeah, in my personal experience, I know that in the work that I was doing as a litigator, when I was putting my own self-care on the back burner and I didn't feel as if certain parts of my daily professional life were aligned with my values, I felt very disconnected from the work that I was doing. But when I was able to recognize that and then find ways to, I think I was pretty aware what my values, what they were then, what they are now. But when I was able to align my work so that I could feel more connected to it and connected to who I innately am, that I found more joy in my work. The people who I work with who are really struggling with stress and anxiety and not feeling connected to their work or to themselves is because they don't put their values in the forefront of their attention. And in turn, I think they become very resentful towards their work, towards their colleagues, their leaders, maybe even their clients.
Yeah,
But and then they're more prone to burnout ultimately.
for
But
sure.
so what are some of the tools that you use to help your clients really identify their values? Because I know that sometimes when we're so used to just being on the go and we become very conditioned to lead from what we think we should be, our
Mhm.
values may become a bit blurred. So, are there certain tools that you use to help people hone in on what their values are?
Yeah, one of my favorite exercises is what drives you batty.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what absolutely drives you batty right now? Like when
Yeah,
somebody does this and it makes you mad, like this isn't the way that we show up for our clients. This isn't the
yeah,
way we show up for our colleagues. Like if you do this, it grinds every gear that I have. Let's
yeah.
start there because that shows me that there's a strong undercurrent of a value that lives within that. So if, for example, someone says when an employee doesn't get back to a client within the 24 hours that we've designated as our response time,
Yeah.
it makes me furious. So what value can we extract from that? Is it that, is it that client care? Is it our promptness? Is it attention to detail? Like let's really dig down and extract what that value looks like for you and other ways that it shows up in your practice. And are there correlations between this as a personal value of mine and this is a value that I want for the practice, the firm, the business that we're running? Because sometimes those are two different things. Sometimes we hold personal values and then we also have business values. And
Right.
like client care is not a personal value of mine because in my day-to-day personal life of taking care of my family and being in my community, I don't
Yeah.
have clients, right?
Yeah.
But inside
Yeah.
of my business, that might be a very strong, very important, significant value. So that's one of my favorite exercises. What drives you batty? Like what's your non-negotiables?
Yeah.
What's keeping you up at night because you're irritated that it's something that could destroy your reputation, that
Yeah.
could like show other people that this business or this practice isn't serious. They don't care for me. They don't take care of us. They do shoddy work, whatever it is. And so that's where I always like to start with the values exercise because it's hard to sit down and somebody goes, "Well, what are your values?" And you're like,
Yep.
"I don't know. There's so many, and I'm a person of integrity, and I have honesty, and it's important to take care of people." And it's like you could name 1,000 things. And so that's where we usually start is what drives me batty, and then I like to do like I don't know where I got this term from, but I heard a long time ago called slap a map. It's a
Slap,
weird term. It's a weird term.
slap a mat.
Slap a map. And
Yep.
so basically, you take a pile of sticky notes and you write down what are those values that you want to embody or that you feel are important to you in your practice in your business, and
Hmm.
you take one value and you write it on each sticky note, and
Yeah.
then you put those up onto the wall and you start putting them together, because what you're going to start to see are patterns of values. You're going to say, okay, all of these have to do with integrity, all of these have to do with client care, all of these have to do with taking care of our team, whatever those are. And so we
Right.
can start to see like patterns within the values. So it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, there's 50 post-it notes on the wall. There's actually six core groups or eight core groups. And from there, we can start to narrow it down as to what are those values and how do I define them within the context of my business, my practice, my leadership. And now let's put a definition around that. Because I think this is the part that most people skip when they're doing values exercises. They're just like, oh, these are my feel good terms and this feels aspirational. No. What does this look like in practice every day in your team? Because that's where we build concrete values that we can actually now build boundaries around, set expectations around, create accountable teams around. And so it feels a lot more tangible when you can put it into practice like that.
Yeah, I love what I'm a very visual person, so for me to just have like be like a collage on the wall and then to be able to see it as opposed to just the thoughts and sort of the values being there, but they're just swirling around, to be able to see it and prioritize it in a visual format, I think would be very powerful for someone like myself. And the the what makes you batty, that sort of reflection point, I really like that, because sometimes when you ask people, what are your positive values, what are the things that really make you feel fulfilled, I think people have a hard time to identify that. But if you ask them, like, what really annoys you, what drives you crazy,
Mhm.
from an evolutionary standpoint, we're so much more easily in touch with what feels unpleasant or what makes us upset or what bothers us in some way. So when you can at least identify that, and then with your help start to see patterns, it helps you to see what we really value, what makes us feel alive and happy. And so I think they're really practical tools. Do you have an example of a client that you worked with where you helped them to identify their core values, and then how that sort of played out when they put it into practice in their profession?
Yeah, for sure. Lots of them.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Yeah, just kind of pulling one to the forefront of my mind is a client that I've worked with over the past year, and she came to me initially, and my first question is always like, okay, well, let's start with your values. Let's talk about those. Like, do you have values? Oh yeah, of course. And she has this little list of words, one word or short phrases that she brings, and I'm like, okay, well, what do these mean to you? Well, they just mean like this is how we act in my business. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Show me what that looks like. And it was hard for her to really pull forward into that conversation examples of what this looks like in practice. And
Mhm.
so I was like, how do these values feel? Do these feel aligned? And so a lot of it is conversation and like that back and forth, and let's really explore this a little bit more. So we went through the exercises and
Yeah.
we did the what drives you batty, which I have to say, everybody loves this exercise. Everybody giggles. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you want me to like vent about things?" Yes,
Yeah. It
because it's a
feels
pattern disruption.
and
Yeah.
it's probably cathartic to just get it
Mhm.
off your chest and give it a voice,
Mhm.
and then yeah, I imagine so.
Yeah. Say to me what you wouldn't say to anyone else. Say to me
Yeah.
what you've been thinking, what you've been feeling, and
Yeah.
like let's just get it all out there. This is a no judgment zone when we go through this exercise. And usually I'll share things that drive me batty because I'm
Yeah.
like, misery loves company sometimes, but also when you're going through this exercise, you don't want to seem too harsh. And so I'll
Yeah.
share things that kind of help break that ice.
Right. Right.
So we go through the exercises, and she starts to go, wow, I didn't realize like my values could be so in depth and so powerful and so meaningful and grounded. And I'm like, yes, and this is what we get to build from. And so
Mm.
over the course of the past year, part of our work together has been building her own leadership confidence, and that being grounded in those values, she's able to go back to that and refer to those values and say, okay, might be a scary moment for me, or this might be a boundary I know I need to set. How does that how does that ground into my values? Where is that coming from? Because we don't like to do things, especially like very value-centered people don't like to do things that are incongruent with our values. And
Right.
so if we can show ourselves that this boundary, so let's say I have this period of time from 10 to 11 in the morning that I'm securing for myself as my CEO time to work on my vision and work on my strategy.
Mhm.
No interruptions during this time. That
Yeah.
can feel like I now don't have an open door policy. But if part of that work is grounded in your values of taking better care of your clients and you're
Yeah.
working on client care during that hour, now it becomes very aligned. It becomes very grounded and centered. And so we can say, no, this is important. This
Yeah.
is grounded in my values, and I can communicate that now to my team more effectively because it's not me being selfish.
Yeah.
It's me being focused on what matters the most. And so she's been able to do that with several different projects she's worked on. And she actually landed a $20 million contract earlier this year because she was so grounded in her boundaries
Yeah.
that the client wanted to work with her and only her. And she's a boutique law firm owner. And she was like, nope, this is how my team works. This is how we operate. Here's how we're taking care of you. And now it's grounded in client care and healthy boundaries and making sure her time is protected. And the client was like, I love that. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I'm on board, and signed the contract that day.
Well, I imagine that the client senses her trueness, her authenticity coming through. And when clients feel connected in that way, again, it goes back to the trust element. So, uh, you know, more likely than not, a client's going to want to work with that leader who they feel like is authentic, is their true self.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and
And who
then
doesn't compromise on their values, right?
yeah, and I also imagine I see it in the work that I do when I work with people who want to become more mindful and they can notice some of their habitual patterns that maybe doesn't serve them, in turns not serving the team, when they can create healthier routines, when they can establish more nourishing boundaries, and they can really focus in more closely on what it is they want for themselves, what they want for their teams, what they want for their organization, it ripples out into the whole workplace culture. So it's really getting back. I know we talked about the boundaries a bit, but when leaders can understand that it's really not a selfish thing, that this is going to come back to not only benefit you as the leader, but your teams collectively, there's a whole different sort of relationship to taking care of ourselves as leaders and aligning with our truest values. I
Yeah.
think that's really powerful. If there's a leader who is listening today and is feeling overwhelmed, or maybe they're feeling overextended, or they're afraid of being too compassionate, or not enough this or that as a leader, what's one small shift that they can make this week?
Yeah. I think it's recognizing that your softness is your strength, and being okay with that, not feeling like that is a negative or it's something holding you back. And really just to think about, how can I leverage this softness in meaningful ways?
Yeah,
Because I think too many times we try to just strong arm our way through the day. We put on that armor we talked about earlier.
yeah.
And sometimes the best course of action is to step back and recognize all the beautiful ways that our compassion shows up in our work and in our world.
That's I feel like can we just record, keep that and play it over and
Yeah,
over for
our
if
mantra.
yeah, for myself to hear, and for all teams around to hear. That's really powerful. And I think it is a reminder that leadership doesn't require us to harden, that
Mhm.
it requires us to become more grounded. And when we're
Mhm.
grounded and compassionate and we reconnect with our values and are present for our teams, our teams feel safe,
Yeah.
they trust us, and in turn that's how companies, organizations really thrive. So thank you for sharing all of this. If someone who is listening wants to learn more about you and your work, where can they connect with you?
Yeah. So thank you so much, Courtney, for having me today. This has been such a beautiful conversation, and I hope everyone who's listening is feeling more supported and has something to take away to really just um, lean into this week. So you can find me at ashleycox.co everywhere you go. I'm on the internet and LinkedIn. I have Facebook and Instagram. Those areas aren't quite as visited as LinkedIn is, where you're going to find me the most often. But yeah, if you are interested in just those micro shifts and that soft leadership and finding ways to create um, a business and a team that you really can just keep falling in love with because it is so grounded and values centered, that is the work that I love to do the most.
I know this was not something that we talked about talking, for the actual episode, but you and
Mhm.
I, before we started recording, because we have another minute or so, I love something that, I mean, there's so much that you shared in this episode alone that I really love, but we were just talking before we hit the record button about the pressure, not only as leaders, but as human beings in the
Mhm.
world that we live. Come January 1st, we're expected to be our best selves and to be creative and move forward with projects. And you and I were saying, being that we're spring babies,
Mhm.
that we feel most creative and sort of coming out of that hibernation and that rest post holiday time in March, in April. So I loved what you shared about this time of year. If you just want to share about the horse and the
Yeah.
energy, because I think that even if you're not into astrology or signs, that piece, that message is one that is an invitation to be more kind and compassionate to ourselves. And when we can extend that to ourselves, it just kind of, at least for me, I find some of the weight of the world can be lifted.
Yeah. So as we're recording this, it is February 17th, 2026. And today is the first day of the Lunar New Year. And what's so exciting, I think, about the year that's coming is it's the year of the fire horse. And it's a time for us to be bold and step into who we're becoming and try new things. And there's this incredible energy and fire that is kind of brewing right now. And 2025 was the year of the snake, and it was all about shedding and getting rid of what doesn't serve us, including people and things and processes and all the stuff that was just weighing us down and holding us back. So we're coming out of a year of shedding and into a season of emboldenedness. And I'm so excited for that because I feel like this is the energy that we need at this time. And I encourage everyone, like, embrace your inner fire horse energy, and allow that to guide you in this journey of becoming who it is that you're meant to be in this world.
I'm not going to add a thing more to that because I'm going to end on that note because it really resonated with me and I hope it resonates for so many others. So, again, Ashley, thank you so much for being my guest today. And I look forward to continuing to support your work. It's so very much needed. And wish everybody else who's listening and watching a great rest of your day and take the best of care.